Hi, everyone. You've got Tiffany Yu here. Pronouns are she, her. I'm a Taiwanese American woman with below the shoulder length black hair wearing a blue top. And today I'm the host of this episode of Diversability Amplified. And we are doing a fun mini series. Well, fun for me because my book is coming out called The Anti-Ableist Manifesto on October 8th. And we wanted to interview a couple of the people whose stories are featured in the book. And so one of those people is Kelley Coleman, who has a book that has come out, which I also have a copy of, called Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child. And I'm going to read her bio, and then she's going to provide a visual description. So let me do the formal stuff. Kelley Coleman is a feature film development executive turned author and advocate for parent caregivers and individuals with disabilities. Her book, Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Supports, draws upon over a decade of experience, including her own experience parenting a child with multiple disabilities. Kelley lives in Los Angeles with her husband, two boys, and her son's trusty service dog. So with that, I wanted to say, hello, Kelley, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. My visual description, I am a white woman with below the shoulder length straight hair that's kind of pinkish today. I have black cat's eye glasses, a bright pink shirt. Behind me is graphically patterned wallpaper and a copy of my book, which I appreciate you being with me on the journey of publishing. We have the same publisher, and I'm so thrilled for your book to be coming out and for the world to have that.
Yeah, it's coming up soon. But let's so this is the second time you've been on the Diversability Amplified podcast. So we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive, but I would love to just hear a little bit more. And you probably get asked this question a lot because I get asked this question a lot, but what made you initially decide to write this book?
Yes, so I was a writer in the before times, before kids, before COVID, before all the things. My background is mostly in coming up with ideas for talking animal movies, which is super fun, but I have no real world skills. And I'm the parent of two amazing kiddos, one of whom has multiple disabilities. And this is the book that I swore I would never write. Um, because it just seemed like, oh, I'm living in the world of paperwork and planning constantly. Do I really want to sit down and write this? And the thing that pushed me towards, yes, I passionately want to write this is my son who's just awesome. He was in a great phase where all the medical things were lining up and he was doing well until one night they weren't, and everything was hitting the fan, and up all night with trying to control seizures and vomiting and like all of the things that are really hard. And the next day he was in good shape, and we took him to a therapy that he absolutely loves and is play for him. And I took a moment to just sit down by myself and hit this wall of just crying and being exhausted and saying, I can barely do this. And I am, and not the like parenting my kid because he's wonderful, but the paperwork, the planning, the medical management, the physical stuff that goes into the job of caregiving that can be very challenging. I'm good at it. I have the executive functioning that I can put the widgets into the place to make them happen. And I have every advantage in the world. And this is really hard for me. And so many of my friends, my son's friends, families don't check all the privilege boxes that we do. And the access to information is so unequal. And if I have such a hard time, but I'm managing, how is this for my friends who don't check these boxes? And I am so passionate about making the access to information equal so that we can do the things and the paperwork that's never going to be fun, but that we have to do so we can navigate that and spend less time with all of that business and more time as parents really focused on our kids and loving them exactly as they are and separating the the challenges of the job of caregiving from, oh, our kids are awesome, like they're great.
Yeah. And I was looking down for a bit because I just wanted to find your quote in my book. But yeah, I think in talking to other parents who have disabled kids, I and I'm not a parent of a disabled kid. I was a disabled kid once upon a time. Um, and my parent it's non-disabled. I feel like there's a period of time where it's like urgent figure it out mode. And um then after a certain period of time, maybe it's 10 plus years, now the child is, an early teenager, where you finally come up for air, or maybe you have figured out the systems in place or found better support systems for how to navigate and manage. And so that's why I've been super excited that this book is now out in the world. Can you talk a little bit about kind of this transition from being a parent to then becoming a non-disabled disability advocate?
Yes. So I love this conversation. And I invite any correction or like, whoa, I can't believe you just said that from you and from anyone else. I will always be figuring out this space and where I fit into it. As you said, I am not disabled. One of my kids is, one of my kids is not. And how can I raise him to be fully himself, to self advocate, and to not be steamrolling through and talking over him and other disabled individuals, but at the same time, not erase my own experience as a caregiver? And how can I own the caregiving experience, not inappropriately and weirdly own the disability experience that is not mine? And yet acknowledge that disability, Emily Ladau, who I interview in my book, who's just brilliant in her book Demystifying Disability, is so great. In my conversation with her, she said disability isn't your experience, but it gives structure to your experience. And I felt like, yes, that is it. And there is an amount of advocating for systems change that I'm able to do that my child isn't able to do, partly because he's an 11-year-old dude and he's way more interested in airplanes and going swimming than he is in advocating for systems change. So it has been a journey and will always be a journey of how can I make a difference in this space but not suck up all the air in the room when I can be standing alongside and behind disabled advocates who should be at the head of this and saying, what do I have to contribute? And how can I use that to foster other caregivers' experience? And how can I use that to foster people who are disabled who want to be in front of the advocacy and stepping into that space more and more? And in supporting those individuals and saying, I'm here to bring your voice to the forefront has been some of the most rewarding parts of this journey for me. Because at the beginning of this journey, and you're right, the beginning of it, like it is just such a mess. Because as a parent, you're getting all of these messages of how we started on this journey with our son when he was an infant. We're getting all of these messages of how tragic my kid is because he's disabled, and how are you going to do this? This is so awful. I'm so sorry. And like, can somebody just tell me that my baby has amazing hair? Like, he's baby, he's great. Um, you're fighting against all of this awful messaging, against all of this internalized ableism that most of us don't even realize we had. I didn't realize I had it until I was faced with all of these reasons why life was going to be terrible. And cut to my kid now who is just Like he is the mayor of everywhere he goes, and he is this like vibrant, engaged human. It is hard, it is messy, and the shorthand to making this easier is both in connecting with other families who have a shared or similar experience and in getting our information about disability from disabled people. Um, Parents, I don't know how we didn't get that memo, but we did not get that memo. Um, People are so afraid to talk about disability, especially when you're thinking about having kids, when you are pregnant, when your kids are young, because it is just seen as this specifically undesirable thing. So it's so bad we can't talk about it. No, it's actually just math. It shouldn't be shocking. It can happen to anyone at any time from birth or through circumstance of life. We got to talk about this. And the sooner we can be getting information, whether it's the language, the facts, the here's how to order feeding tube supplies from disabled people, the sooner this becomes not scary and it just becomes part of a shared human experience.
Yeah, I know you mentioned, I guess I have a two-part question, which you mentioned Emily Ladau and some of the people you interviewed for this book. I would love to hear kind of if there were any surprises or big takeaways from the interviews that you did. And I know you got to interview the late Judy Human as well.
Mm.
And then I don't know if it ties into my second part question, but you talked about parents needing to follow and be in community with disabled leaders. And I think in some ways, years ago, I don't know if we were as quote unquote easy to find now with the democratization of social media, but I don't know if you have any tips for non-disabled people who are listening to figure out where to find those people.
Yes.
So first was about the
So,
interviews, and then second was about kind of tips for people to really be in community with the disability community.
yes. So those answers to those are actually incredibly closely linked. So, in my book, I have interviews with over 40 experts, very many of whom are disabled themselves. That was very important to me. And the biggest surprise was just how many people said yes, whether it was Judy Human, whether it was Rebecca Coakley of the Ford Foundation, whose work I've been following closely for many years. Um, I was hesitant to even reach out to a number of people because they're doing this on high levels, and are they really going to have time or interest for me? And how immediately people saw the need for connecting with parents and having these real conversations. I was so impressed and humbled by how many people said yes, because they recognize that these conversations aren't happening and parents are not being trained in any way for this job of caregiving. And even the conversation about disability just isn't happening. So that was really amazing to connect with all of these leaders. And a question that I asked Rebecca Coakley is exactly what you said. Is I said, okay, so it's super weird if I just go out and I'm like, "Hey, you're disabled. Can we be friends?" Like, no, that's not how life works. Don't do that, people. Don't. Um, and I said, "So I want to be in community with more disabled adults because that's important to me." And she emphasized the need for us to be friends with real life disabled people so that our children have real life role models who we know and trust. So they're not just seeking out people with shared experience online because that's scary. And so I asked her, I was like, how do we do that? And the first thing she said is, you all, and you being me, being everyone else, you already know disabled people, whether or not they have shared that information with you of their disability is their own business. In the United States, 1 in 4 adults has a disability. So again, it is just math. Disabilities might be visible, they might not be visible. So just know those people are already in your circles. The fastest, easiest, and no cost way to be following and getting information from people is going online. No one is obligated to share their story, certainly their personal life or medical details with you, in person, online, or otherwise. But so many content creators and leaders are incredibly generous with sharing their experience. Follow them online. Curate your social media feed. Follow organizations, follow individuals who are outside of your demographic on many levels, and especially within different disabilities. And show up to listen and to learn, not to comment with your 2 cents worth about all the great things you're doing, but show up to learn, because you will absolutely learn. And she also said connecting with organizations, whether it is showing up to their events, whether it is volunteering, participating in activities for cerebral palsy, autism, rare disease, undiagnosed disease, your specific syndrome, Down syndrome, whatever it is, there are so many organizations that you can plug into. And when you have the opportunity to be in community with people who are self-advocates or who are just there hanging out, um, get to know those people as allies, friends, humans, not as your token disabled friend. Um, we don't need to tokenize people. We don't need to do the you're disabled. Cool. I'm here to learn from you, because it is not anyone's responsibility to be your teacher or inspiration or hold your hand. Nope, definitely not. But opportunities arise just by getting to know other people as people, and just being curious about other people as fellow humans.
Yeah, I love that. I have a chapter in my book called, well, originally it was called Advocate with Us, Not for Us. And then I also have a chapter called Be in Community with Disabled People. But I wanted to talk a little bit about I mean, I think what you said around and I actually think in my chapter on the Be in Community with Disabled People, exactly what you said. You'll hear people say, oh, but I like don't know any disabled people. And what you said, you probably do. They just maybe haven't felt safe to talk to you about their
Mhm.
non-apparent disabilities, um, or maybe you haven't achieved a level of, or maybe they just don't want to
Yes,
as well. So,
yes.
touching on your point around curiosity, um, your quote in my book, which I'm going to read, is I have a chapter called Ask Better Questions. And so I'm going to read your quote and kind of want your. So part of why I reached out to you, I know it's very short notice. It was short notice for everybody. So if you didn't get quoted in the book, everything was on deadline and probably past deadline. Um, but interestingly enough, I actually, in my work, don't engage a lot with kids. And at the same time, I've gotten questions around the curiosity of kids. And I saw a really great Instagram post from another disabled person who said the best thing you can do is affirm the child's curiosity. So if someone sees someone who is a wheelchair user and the kid goes, oh, it's a wheelchair, you say, yes, that's a wheelchair. But I wanted to read your quote, which again is in this chapter called Ask Better Questions, and then kind of wanted to get your take on curiosity of kids and around asking questions, and then maybe how that changes as you become an adult. So here's the quote. I don't know if this is the final one either. This is the advanced reader copy. But it says, Kelley Coleman, mom of 2 boys, one of whom has multiple disabilities, and the author of Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, says, we have often had children and adults stare or ask questions about our son's feeding tube. We emphasize that accommodations aren't something extra that my child or any other disabled person is getting. They're what he needs in order to fully participate in his world. I can answer questions in real ways and not pretend that my child is a superhero because he has a disability. He's a kid living his life and some similarities and some differences from your child. Or sorry, he's a kid living his life with some similarities and some differences from your child. If kids ask, what's wrong with him? We can explain that having a disability is perfectly normal and is just part of our everyday lives. We choose not to share our son's private medical information with strangers, just as they do not share their private medical information with us. The point isn't to ask someone their diagnosis, but instead to normalize disability and the child's curiosity. In doing this, you set your child up for future encounters with disability, which will, of course, happen throughout their life. Many parents need to unlearn their own ableism and the negative messaging around disability that they grew up with. Raising anti-ableist kids starts with acknowledging our own biases and normalizing disability for our children every opportunity we get. Do you have a
I
reaction to your own quote?
I have so many reactions to that. I feel like that could be the entire episode because first, so much of that I did not know when I started my parenting journey. And I think it's so important to acknowledge where you are starting from. And so many of us did grow up with this don't pretend like you don't see that kid, pretend like you don't see that adult using a mobility device or a feeding tube or who's moving or communicating differently. Like, what? That is so inherently negative. And my child is quite literally loud and proud, and the way he moves and communicates and cheers for the lettuce at the grocery store. I know you see him. He knows you see him. So if you're pretending not to see him, it's super awkward for everyone. And nobody wants to go through life like that. Um, so be open to unlearning anything and everything, whether it's by way of your child or whether it's by way of being a person in the world. We do get people staring, we do get questions, and it is overwhelmingly coming from a place of curiosity. If your child is staring at my child, this is not the first time. We're not new to this. Especially with the feeding tube is a great concrete example. I had never heard of a feeding tube until my baby was getting a feeding tube. And it's a great way to say, even as a parent, you might not know what a feeding tube is. And if your child is staring, you can say, oh, I see that too. How cool is that? And by saying the how cool is that? Or when I see kids staring, I say, oh, yeah, you've noticed my kid's feeding tube. How cool is that? Then kids have planted in their head, oh, yeah, that's cool. And do you want to know more? I have a child who is very social, very outgoing, and is totally comfortable with a level of, yeah, we can talk about the feeding tube, we can talk about the service dog, we can talk about the AAC communication device that he uses to communicate. And for him, that is comfortable. I know many folks and many kids certainly whose disabilities are not visible, or even if they are not comfortable sharing, or they do not feel safe sharing. And again, we can't expect that from anyone else, and we need to lean towards our kids' comfort and safety level first and foremost. Um, but when we can approach from a place of this is just information. Hey, this is how he eats. Do you like to eat smoothies? Oh, you do. Cool. My kid gets smoothies all day, every day, and we make them for him, and that's what it's his food. Do you like strawberries? Yep, he's getting strawberries in here, and it's like getting a smoothie for him. And we can very easily find those points of commonality. Again, the feeding tube, and it's like a smoothie. The service dog, it's not a pet, it's a working dog, but oh, you just said you love dogs. Cool, us too. And we can focus on those points of commonality. And at the same time, and certainly for our kids whose disabilities are not visible, we can move through life not apologizing for how our children exist in the world. That was a shift that we made because we realized our son, who again, he is dancing and taking up the whole aisle in the grocery store sometimes, he is cheering loudly at the library. Um, that's just part of who he is. Is there anything wrong with that? No, there's actually not. And if he grows up hearing us apologizing for him not actually doing anything wrong, that is not how we want our kid to grow up. You know, when someone says, we're in a movie theater, he's like, hey, can you keep your kid quiet? And I say, actually, this is quiet for him. Thank you for understanding. And it took a lot of awareness and effort on our part to stop saying, oh, I'm so sorry. Because I'm actually not sorry for him or his disability or his very large presence in the world. That is him. And that is gloriously and wonderfully him. Um, we find ourselves saying, thank you for understanding without offering an explanation. I'm not saying, oh, he's disabled, he's autistic, he has cerebral palsy, he has a feeding tube, he has cortical vision impairment, he has communication differences, he has epilepsy. Like he's got all those things. He checks a lot of boxes because that's how he was built. And we don't apologize for that. And it actually makes it way more comfortable for everyone because everyone else is hearing the message of, oh, okay, that's just how he is, instead of putting our family or certainly our kid in this position of, oh, you poor thing, I feel so bad for you. Like, if you meet my kid, like, you don't need to feel bad for him. He's great.
Yeah, I've become a big fan of scripts. And I love that one. Thank you for understanding. And I think for a long time I didn't want to put words into people's mouths of like what they should and should, or I would tell them all the things they shouldn't say, and I would get feedback that now they know all these things not to say, but they don't know what to say. And then I'd be like, oh, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. But now I'm learning, maybe I provide you with a starter script, whether it's thank you for understanding, thanks for your patience, here's what I need right now.
Yes.
And then you adapt it to whatever works best for you. But I relate a lot to the stairs. I actually wrote my college essay about the stairs, but it's the stairs that don't create an invitation for conversation.
Hmm.
Um, but one thing I had for you, you talked about when he grows up, and I do get this question a lot about even questions that I get now in my mid 30s about the relationship between me and my non-disabled parents. And I would often tell people that even as a fully grown adult, I'm always going to be my mom's kid or my mom's child. And so as your kid gets older, who will still be your kid, even as he becomes an adult, what do you hope the world looks like when he becomes an adult?
What I hope the world looks like when he becomes an adult, on an idealistic and realistic sense, are unfortunately very different. Idealistically, I wish that we saw disabled people everywhere and in every space because that's where they belong. Unfortunately, society has a long way to catch up to get there, and I hope we get there in our lifetimes. I certainly hope we get there in my son's lifetime. Um, as a parent, and in my interview in my book with Maria Town of the AAPD, she talks about this with her own very supportive mother, saying she has been incredibly supportive in my journey, and as a mom, she will always see the hurdles and the challenges that we have had to face around disability, and as a parent, she can't separate that. So I'm aware that because we've had to climb a lot of mountains to fully find these supports and services that allow our son to thrive, that will always be a part of that relationship and the parenting journey. So I know that I need to surround him with community who is seeing him as who he is without the baggage that unfortunately I will always have, even as I am fully supportive of him as a fully realized human. What I hope for him is that he has full agency and self-advocacy in his adult life as he becomes an adult, that he is a respected and active and contributing member of the community, that he is able to have choice and self-determination in his work, life, relationships, what he's doing for fun, and how his future unfolds, which is the exact same thing I want for my non-disabled child. I think we need to say, what are we really hoping for all of our kids? Ultimately, it is the same thing. What that looks like for each of my kids, of course, that will be different. They are very different humans. One of my kids does not have disabilities, and he's not someone whose support needs I need to take into consideration. My other child has high support needs. He will always be interdependent. He has intellectual disabilities. He has medical disabilities. There are many factors that require support that we will need to take into account. I need to take those into account so that I can put the support needs in place for him that he is not able or might not in the future be able to put in place for himself. And at the same time, teach him, even on the most basic levels, to self-advocate from an early age, because to the extent that he is able as an adult, I don't know what extent that will be. We do not know intellectually or developmentally or medically where he will end up. Um, I need to build in every single level of self-determination I can for him. And that starts for him with fostering his communication. He has a good and still emerging level of independent communication, much of which has only developed recently. Um, Independent communication is not the goal for everyone. There are many individuals who will always need facilitated communication, but look at what that is and how you can show them that their communication, especially about their own lives and wants and needs, will be honored. For my kid, it might be saying, here's some shirts. Which shirt do you want to wear today? And when he points to that shirt, that's the shirt he gets to wear. Those small things are building in. When you use your voice, we will listen.
Yeah. And something that I connected with regard to my own mom was just a level of compassion around knowing that she's going to want to make sure things aren't so hard for me, right? And at the time when I was growing up, that was not centering my access needs, trying in an attempt, in thinking that we wouldn't want to make things harder. And I think that's yeah, there's always going to be this, again, me not being a parent, but I feel like there's always going to be this protective side, which is, I don't want you to have to encounter ableism so viscerally, right? And if we, whether it's raising anti-ableist kids or really center accessibility, hopefully those fears will diminish a little bit more, where your son's feeding tube isn't, people don't, we've just seen it, you know? And I will say, I was just talking to someone earlier, in my advocacy, you know, Diversability, the original version of Diversability is turning 15 this year. And I think back to the conversations I had in 2009 to what I'm seeing happening now in 2024. And I don't know if it's a function of me being older and now surrounded around people who are more mature in their, or like later in their careers as well. But I have seen change and I have seen progress from the conversations that I was having 15 years ago. So that hope is still very much alive for me. And sometimes some other advocates that I work with joke, they're like, Tiffany, never lose that idealism that you have to dream really big. Because I had all back when I was living in San Francisco, I had all these big ideas. But I want to kind of close our time together. I know when I had originally sent you the scheduling form, I said, what do you want to talk about? And one of them was how parents can be allies without taking up space where disabled folks should be centered. And I want to share a little framework that I had proposed in my book under an acronym PAPUSD. But then now that I look at it, as I was like editing it, like in the final stages, I was like, there was probably a better way we could have made an acronym with this. But this is from the chapter about advocate with us, not for us. So PAPUSD, and I want to know like which of these kind of resonates with you and is a message you want to leave for listeners around this, like how parents can be allies without taking up space with where disabled folks should be centered. So number one is platform. Give the voices of disabled people a platform by inviting us to the table in decision-making processes or voting us into positions of power. Two is amplify. Share, consume, and disseminate work or content created by disabled people. Three is partner. And actually, I feel like you've touched on all of these throughout our conversation. Three is partner, engage in formal partnerships with disability-led organizations. I included AAPD in this list, but a couple others. Number four, the U, PAPUSD, is use your privilege. Leverage your privilege to remove access barriers, create equitable opportunities, and ensure accessibility in your community. 5 is share your story, which we have talked a little bit about. Share your story and personal experience with disability to advocate for accessibility, but make sure to tell your story from your point of view and do not confuse your story with your disabled loved one's story. They are related but different. And then 6, decenter yourself, respect the limits of your knowledge and what you can do, and decenter yourself in your advocacy work. Was there anything of that? Actually, I feel like we should have started with that and then gone. I feel like you covered some of it. Was there any of that you feel like you really want to hone in on what people take away from showing up for the disability community if they're not disabled?
Yes. So first, all of that in spades. Yes.
That's why we created the acronym.
Yes. And also, it's not hard. None of that is hard at all. Start with an awareness that this is what we need to do. Start with you are not the center of your child's story. You are the caregiver. You are not the center of the disability world. You still have a full identity. And look at how you can do this. For me, sharing my story as a caregiver and not, stepping out in front of all the things in a way that is not appropriate, that's what works for me. I wish all people, but especially all parents and parent caregivers, would look at this list and just pick a thing. What is the one thing that resonates for you? Pick the easiest thing for you to do. Are you sharing those posts from disabled leaders and content creators? It's just that easy. Are you looking at your child's story as all about you? Or are you looking at your child as their own person and thinking about your own story? Pick what is easiest for you and start there. And it will feel good. It will be easy. And it will allow you to listen to and learn from disabled people, which allows you to be a better parent, supporter, and loved one to your child. And aren't we all kind of looking for that?
Yeah, and I think something important to take away from this conversation is that caregivers are not invisible. And I remember I was at a disability event recently, and the disabled person was there, their parent was there, and I was asking each person, I was like, hey, what's your name? And then I turned to a third person who was there, and she goes, oh, I'm just the caregiver. And I said, you're not just the caregiver, we need you. And so I do think, again, it's your story does matter. Just make sure you don't conflate it with the disability community. I probably know the answer to this, but I wanted to know if you are plugging anything at the moment, and want our audience to, if you have a call to action for them.
Yes.
If it's to
So
buy your book, we can wave it out so that
yes.
people see.
So absolutely my book, Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Supports. It's weirdly not boring, I swear. And it's how the heck to do all of the paperwork and the planning. And like no one knows how to call their insurance company and like the financial and future care plans and IEPs, as well as the advocacy and the all the other pieces. Yes, go out, buy my book, tell everyone, but ask your local library to carry it. The people who need this information the most are the ones who can't afford to buy a book. This book needs to be in every library, medical, educational, social service office, anyone who could be delivering a diagnosis or especially starting off early with parents and families on this journey. We can fundamentally change how parents enter into this world of caregiving, of being a parent to a disabled child. And it can be better and easier and good, but we need to get this information to everyone.
I love that. And I'm currently in the process of launching my book. And if you're not sure how to request a book at your local library, you can actually search request a title and the name of your local library, and it should come up with either a form you fill out or something like that. And hopefully we can get your book into more libraries. If people want to follow you, I know you're not super active on social media. Is there a good place where people can learn more about you or connect with you?
Yes, my website has all the social media and events and other info. It's kelleycoleman.com, and that's Kelley Coleman.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of Diversability Amplified.
Thank you for having me and for all that you are doing.